Okay.
Right. I would like to call the Policy Committee of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Monday, September 29th, and we are meeting in an online format. Today we have with us Chief of Strategy and Operations, Dr. Sarah Warren, District 1 Representative Mickey Bondo, At-Large Representative Yusra Ali, and also joining us is Board Chair Sarah Lentz. So thank you for being here tonight. On the agenda tonight, we are, I'm so sorry. I was looking at another agenda while we were waiting. Okay, today we are going over the ACAA and the ACAB policies, which pertain to harassment, discrimination, and sexual harassment of students is the ACAA, and then ACAB is harassment, discrimination, and sexual harassment of employees. And those two we will be voting on this evening. And then we are going to have our second read of GBEB, which is a new policy that we are creating, which is the staff conduct with students. And Dr. Warren will be leading the presentation. Oh, we have District 2 Representative Ali with us. And yep, we've got the whole committee minus the student representatives right now. Thanks for being here.
Great. Shall I go ahead?
Yes.
All righty. Let me see. Okay. I'm going to leave it like this because if I do a slideshow, let's see what happens. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Dr. Warren, I'm so sorry. I forgot to offer up public comment.
Oh, yes.
So, but we don't have any attendees in the waiting room, so I'm going to close public comment.
Okay.
But I wanted to make sure I did that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So, as the chair noted, we've got 3 policies that we're looking at this evening. We talked about all of these a little bit during our last meeting, but we did not want to rush through ACAA and ACAB, so we are revisiting those tonight. And GBEB, we plan to have at least one more conversation about that since it's a new policy and a fairly important one, and pretty dense in terms of the content. So we will review that. And I'm going to first just start out with an overview on ACAA and ACAB as a refresher of what we talked about last week at the last meeting. And then I will pull up those policies and we can just walk through them again. And then we'll come back and talk about GBEB. So ACAA and ACAB are the student and staff employee versions, respectively, of our harassment, discrimination, and sexual harassment policies. These are in place already, and there's been actually quite a lot of work done on them by the board over the last few years. But we are in a very similar situation to every other school district in the country, which is essentially that when the federal administration changes, the presidential administration, they have had differing views on some of the nuances of the language and the definition. And so their guidance has required us to change a little bit the way that we write our policy and our procedures. And so if you look at the policies, when you look at the policies, you see that it actually, in way more detail than you typically see in our policies, really lays out what is required under the federal law, under the state law, and under our own policy, because we can go above and beyond really what the federal and state laws require. So we are required to make these changes now, but there is also a specific question that our lawyers have encouraged the board to look at, which is a question around anonymous reporting. So our current version of the policy requires the maintenance of an anonymous reporting system, and that's true in both ACAA and ACAB. So we are required by our current policy to have anonymous reporting options for both students and staff situations. Our legal counsel have advised that the board may want to remove that requirement. It wouldn't prevent or preclude people from potentially submitting an anonymous report. They could still do that, and we would still be required as a district to investigate it. But they're encouraging taking it out, taking this clause out, because it seems to encourage anonymous reporting. And anonymous reporting can be very tricky to handle because the district has to go ahead and investigate any report, but without knowing who the person is or having specifics around who to talk to, it just makes it extremely difficult to investigate. And I don't necessarily personally get involved in many of these cases, so I can't speak to it in a whole lot of depth, but I can say that I've been told by my colleagues who are more deeply involved in these investigations that this has posed a problem and a challenge for them in trying to conduct investigations at times. So let me just pause there before I actually open the policies themselves. Are there any questions so far? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Oh, actually, I don't think I have to do that with Zoom. Hold on. I'm just going to escape the slideshow. Okay. Can you see the policy now? Is that okay? So just as a refresher, what's in front of you right now is ACAA. So that's the one that's focused on students, harassment, discrimination, and sexual harassment of students. And most of what you're seeing here is just the current language. Oops. And so aside from some formatting issues, there's not a whole lot of proposed change in the early paragraphs of this. But once you get down to, let's see, that is section C, number 1. This is where there's a little bit of just changing of language. And actually some of this is really simplification of the way of the structure of these sentences. It's not even a huge amount of change that's proposed to make the policy clearer under this section and to make sure that it aligns to the federal requirements. And so you'll see that the purple is the proposed rewording, and the lines are the proposed things to remove or replace. And then under number 2, the striking of the word unwelcome, it in the second, third and fourth lines, is you see the word unwelcome appears here as a proposed replacement in the first line. So it's still there, but it is just changing the location of the word. And then as we continue to scroll down, this removal of who have not been designated as confidential employees is the lawyers are telling us to strike that because everybody is required to report. There shouldn't be any distinction between confidential or not. And then as we get, oops, I lost the part about, oh, sorry, it is not highlighted. That is why. Okay, so under number 4, this is where we get to the part about reporting without fear of consequences or retaliation. It's this second paragraph, and I'm sorry that it's not showing up as a highlight. This is the paragraph that our lawyers have encouraged us to consider, and whether having a system for reporting that's anonymous is actually something that we want to continue to kind of put out there as a stated option and system in the policies. And that's the same language and the same question that the lawyers are raising in both ACAA and ACAB. So I think most of the changes are relatively straightforward, but that is the one substantive question that the committee should, discuss and decide on what you'd like to do.
I have a question, Dr. Warren. I want some clarification. Are the changes that we are proposing to make, aside from this anonymous reporting one, is the language coming directly from the federal law and we're just basically copying and pasting so that it's within alignment, or are we specifically tailoring it to Portland? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, the definition is coming from the federal regulations. So yes, whether or, I mean, this was what was in our policy before. So if you scroll down, the things that are being crossed out are to a large extent things that were in our policy. And it's a relatively nuanced shift from one administration to the other. It's sort of a matter of where they place emphasis. And the Democratic administrations, the Biden administration tended to be a little bit more focused on the victim, and the Trump version is a little bit more little stricter in trying to define what constitutes harassment. So the language that you're seeing here that's proposed by the lawyers is what works under the current version of the federal requirements.
Thank you. If anyone else has any questions, go ahead and raise your hand. Yes, board member Yusra Ali. Oh,
So I just had a question about if we are still having that anonymous reporting, but then the federally it's not allowed. Sorry, maybe I didn't understand that part. Then isn't that an issue that will arise if someone reports anonymously?
Sorry, yeah, I think I wasn't clear about that. That's my fault. So that is not an issue at the federal level. We can either have the anonymous reporting or not. That is more something that our lawyers were encouraging the board to look at as we're going ahead and doing this review, because of the challenges that anonymous system has posed, and the challenges in investigating something when it's anonymous. Um, it's not like it's a deal breaker or a legal sort of requirement in either direction. It was just their recommendation that while you're already in the process of revising this policy, that might be a clause to look at, because that can create sort of almost seem to be encouraging anonymous reporting, and that's not necessarily ideal from an investigations point of view. But if you chose to keep the anonymous reporting system, that would not be in violation of federal law, or at least not so far.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. A follow-up is so if the board decides that anonymous reporting is does votes against it, what does that mean for people who are not comfortable reporting?
Yeah. So first of all, I should say procedurally, if you wanted to strike that that language, somebody would need to introduce an amendment to remove that language because it's not currently recognized here. It was really more pointed out for discussion. If this were removed, essentially what would happen is that we wouldn't have a policy level requirement that we have a whole system around reporting that's anonymous. But if somebody chose to make an anonymous report, we would still have to investigate that. I mean, the law says that if there's an allegation, we have to investigate it. So even if you choose to take this out, if someone did make an anonymous report, it would get investigated. I think the lawyer's point in trying to potentially remove it was that by having it in the policy in this way, it almost seems to encourage anonymous reporting, which we don't particularly want to do. Sorry.
Okay, thank you so much.
Vice Chair Bondo.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair. Yeah, I think it's just a follow-up what Board Ali just mentioned. Is that the long time ago, I think when I support the confidential reporting, it was because of the respect of the people who been reporting, and also I think it was about to increase the reporting, because when we exposing them, people being afraid to be calling names, and then nothing being moving forward. So, and also fear of the any retaliation around the system. So I get it when you just explaining, Dr. Warren. So that means if we keep the confidential reporting, so that means I heard the request from the legal system. So do we have any challenges from our system? I mean, from the coordinator, what they feel, what they think about those kind of confidential reporting, if it's been challenging for them to know the source of the people been reporting so they can have a better investigation. So I just want to get a sense from our side.
Yeah.
Since we have done that. Thank you.
So a couple of points in response to what you just shared, Vice Chair Bondo. So one is I just want to highlight that the policy also calls out that retaliation is not allowed. And I have been involved in a couple of cases where it was just very clear made clear to people involved that retaliation would not be tolerated. And I think that's something that's that people take very seriously in human resources and in the administration. So even if there weren't a finding of harassment, there could be a finding of retaliation. So that's a major thing. So I just want to emphasize that that's there and that should stay there, because retaliation would be a big problem. In terms of the system, again, unfortunately, Tyler, who was leading this work, is not with us anymore. But in my brief conversations with leadership who have been more involved in these investigations than I have been, I was told that this has having an anonymous reporting system has created some challenges for us. And again, we would still be required to investigate an anonymous report, even if we didn't have a formal system that was required by policy. But the problem is that when somebody makes an anonymous report, then you don't have the person to talk to. It makes investigating the complaint very difficult, and I think challenging for the person who's being investigated, because it sort of feels like it's coming from nowhere. It's from space. So I understand the reason why this was put into place in terms of protecting the people that were reporting. But I think it has, by calling it out in the policy in this way, my impression is that it has created some challenges in terms of investigations.
Yeah, I know then Chair Lance has raised her hand, but I just need to have a follow-up here when you've been talking, Dr. Ryan, is that we didn't have for a long time any reporting or any feedback about our reporting system and how many we were able to solve, and those are issues. So I think that's why I get lost in my mind for years now, the way the system was operated, because for me, I was thinking that, we were able to increase the reporting from students and from staff, and I think I'd see also the credibility of the people of the reporting. I mean, when you're doing confidentially, is just lost the credibility as well. So I mean, it's so difficult for me to balance the situation, because I even didn't see how many investigation we were able to solve. So I just don't have any data around that. So this is so, I've been just struggle for, since I've been reading and go over my thoughts, to remove the reporting system. But I feel like without any data, anything, is really struggle me to move forward in that situation. So I'm just stopping there, just still
Yeah.
working on my mind, and I'll come back later. Okay. Thank you.
And I mean, that's a helpful feedback. I don't personally have that data, but I can request whatever is shareable, right? I mean, certainly these types of investigations are extremely confidential, and handled very carefully for the sake of all involved. But I can request from HR some kind of, aggregate data that might help inform that decision.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan.
Chair Lens.
Yeah, just wanted to add a little bit of context and kind of echo some of the concerns that have been raised. So I think even just when I came on the board, we were having issues with anybody reporting, and it was such a hard thing to get people to report because they didn't know how. And so I do think that this indicates to me that there's been some progress around that. But I worry about removing the option to take out a confidential report. I think, I am hearing that it does become harder. And I think it also, I just don't want to get back to the place where people didn't know how to report, and they weren't reporting, and we didn't have a sense of like what was happening in the schools. And I think that, I still, like, we haven't seen data on this for a while. We haven't had capacity to pull it and analyze it and all those things. But even just like the speak up form that people can use, continuing to embed that into places so that people know that it's an option to use. So I would just echo kind of the concerns around that. And then if it is possible to get any data around like what percentage are coming in confidential right now as compared to otherwise. And then just a note to update the speak up form. It has old information on it at the moment about Tyler being that access point. So if we can get that updated, that would be great.
Yes, I apologize. I thought we had done that. So thank you for flagging that. And again, I just want to emphasize, and I'm like genuinely agnostic on all of this. This is very much the board's decision, but I just want to emphasize again, because I want to make sure I'm passing on specifically what the legal counsel said, that if you remove this paragraph, it does not preclude people from making anonymous reports. It just doesn't encourage it in the same explicit way. The other thing, kind of getting to your point, Chair Lentz, about the reporting procedures, the rules around this policy go into way more detail, right? And they will need to be updated too. I've got an initial draft from our legal team that would align the rules to this, updated policy. But that would obviously need to be adjusted depending on whether the committee and the board decide to take forward this paragraph around the anonymous reporting system. But one thing we could do, I hate to table it again, but if the committee would like, we could come back at the next meeting again with both a little bit of data, and I apologize that I don't already have that for you, but we could try to get some, whatever data is allowable and shareable, as well as I can share with you the current draft of the rules that would go along with an updated policy. And that might help, even though the board itself won't approve the rules, seeing those alongside the policy and the level of detail that goes into the implementation procedures might help you in terms of thinking about the policy itself.
Board member Ali.
Yes, thank you guys. I have been following along, and yeah, I think one of the only things that I would probably add in is I kind of get the piece of the encouragement of anonymity. It's kind of like, if I would relate it to like life, it's kind of like when, say, a black male or a kid was just walking, in a neighborhood that he's not supposed to, and then there's an anonymous call that that kid was selling drugs, right? And what could happen to that child or whatever. I think there's a way of anonymity, right? But for the investigation, I think it's okay for the people that are investigating to know who it is. Because it's very risky. On like, anybody can call and say they don't like me. You can call and say I did what I did, whatever, right? And that's the only thing that I'm kind of a little bit cautious and concerned about. And I think that's where they're coming from with lawyers. But that's it.
Great, thank you all for all of those questions. So Dr. Warren, were you suggesting that, I mean, I think I can see it both ways. One is that I'm not sure there's consensus about removing this. We could take just a straw poll to see if we want to move forward with changing any of the wording, but could we, I mean, there are no red lines in that paragraph right now, so could we approve it as is with the red lines, approve the red lines, and then if we then get the data and want to consider updating it later, or is that problematic procedurally to do that?
Chair Lentz, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you could do that. You could pass it on to the board, and then the board could consider whether or not to remove that paragraph. And we could, prior to putting it in front of the board, bring more detail in terms of the data that we might be able to pull together, and also just showing the draft of the rules that would go alongside this. So it seems like the options are either to do that, to go ahead and vote on it tonight without the paragraph taken out, to potentially pass it on to the board and then deal with the anonymous reporting issue when it gets to the full board, or to table it for one more policy committee meeting and come back and discuss it one more time before you vote.
I think my preference would be to go ahead and vote on it with the proposed changes in place, and then have it come to the full board with some data behind the anonymous reporting. But if anyone has any objections to that, I'd love to hear from you.
I don't object. I just think that before we make like any, I mean, like the small changes that were like, that's not part of the major, the more major issue that we're currently discussing. Yeah, I have no problem in voting for that. I think that, but coming to look at the point of the anonymity piece, right, that we're all supposed to take a look at, I don't think we've even taken a look at it without the data. So I would rather us look at the data first, and and just examine it and have a conversation between us before bringing it to the board. Because by bringing it to the board is like we're presenting something that we it's just like we don't have the data, we don't have the backing and information behind it. So I just think we're a little bit unprepared.
Yeah, that makes sense. Dr. Warren, is the language the same in the ACAB? So would
Yeah.
it would be exactly the same
Yeah.
issue? Okay.
I agree. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. So
Um,
we'll prepare for the next meeting. I will get as much data as we can.
Charlene, did you want to share something?
I would just do a vote on that, just so it's formal and everybody gets to weigh in on that. You're just gonna like hold it in committee for X, Y, and Z.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm gonna make a motion to table the decision of voting on policies ACAA and ACAB until the next policy meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Ali. Any questions from the committee on this motion? Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, then by roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in favor of postponing the vote on policies ACAA and ACAB until the next meeting of the policy committee. Board Member Ali,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bondo,
Yes.
Board Member Yusra Ali,
Yes.
and I vote yes. So it's unanimous. Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Chair, is it okay to move on to GBEB?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So as a reminder, policy GBEB is new. Oops. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can. Okay. So this is staff conduct with students. And again, just as a refresher for people who may be watching this and aren't familiar, these letters like GBEB and ACAA, they're part of a standard lettering system that's national, right? So we use this sort of standardized system of lettering policies. They don't necessarily have a whole lot of meaning in terms of what the letters stand for. That set of policy names and letters is just sort of there and available to us to use. And if you go and look at our website, you'll see we have many policies. So we've addressed many of the ones that are, potential policies, but for reasons that I'm not really sure about because I wasn't here, don't have the historical memory or knowledge. This GBEB is not something that Portland has in place already, and I really don't know why. It is a problem on multiple levels, both just in general. We really ought to be, I think, clearly laying out what the expectations are around staff conduct with students. And that really should be coming at the board level as policy. And in ACAA and ACAB, it actually references policy GBEB, but it goes nowhere. There's no policy to refer to. So this is something that was needing attention and needing to be cleaned up. What we have given you is mostly, it is the model policy that came from Drummond. So they kind of keep on hand model policies for a lot of these potential policies, and then school boards can take the model and adapt as appropriate for the district circumstances. So that's kind of what we're wrestling with here is the model policy in front of us, but it really needs to be made appropriate for Portland. for Portland Public Schools. So if there are any significant changes that the committee or the board choose to make to the model policy, we need to take it back to the lawyers just to make sure we're not doing something that could be a legal problem, because this is fairly important and sensitive territory. Oops, trying to advance the slides unsuccessfully. So some of the issues that are flagged in the document for consideration, and again, I'll flip over to the document in a second, but just to highlight them for now. One is just in general, does the committee feel, and ultimately does the board feel like what's contained in the policy that the lawyers have put forward as a draft, does that really get at all the things that the board feels are important to address? And I've just named a couple of things here that are not called out in that policy that sometimes come up in conversation. Holding a child in one's lap, picking up a student and carrying them. Since I do a lot of work with pre-K, in particular, I know that that's often sort of the culture of, it seems, of pre-K classrooms to be quite sort of snuggly and physically, affectionate with children. And there are other people who think that that's not appropriate in a school setting, even when it's pre-K. So that's not currently specifically called out in this model policy, but that's the kind of thing that you might want to consider. And then in the document, you will also note that there's some language that relates to exceptions around if a staff member has a relationship with a family outside of the school setting, making sure that we're clear about what are sort of appropriate and acceptable ways for that staff member to engage with a student, knowing that they know them outside of Portland Public Schools. It's mentioned very briefly in there right now. And in talking with the superintendent about this, he was suggesting that the committee and the board might want to think about that a little bit more, because Portland is such a small town that a lot of staff have relationships with many different families outside of the setting of the district. And then the policy language about staff communication with students is tricky and something that we should look up in more detail, and that the committee, I think, will want to weigh in on in terms of what is regarded as appropriate or not for staff members to be doing in the way of communication with students. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the actual policy. Can you see that okay? Okay. And again, for anyone who may be watching this or want to look at it yourselves, this is on the website under the board, the documents for tonight's meeting. So much of this is that standardized language that came to us from the legal team. There's this fairly lengthy section around prohibited conduct. It's meant to be indicative of things that would be inappropriate, but not necessarily all inclusive. So it could be that there are things that are inappropriate that don't end up getting named here. But of course, the more detailed we are, the clearer the policy is. So if the board has particular behaviors that you want to make sure are deemed inappropriate or prohibited, then those should really get called out here. I think a lot of these would be not, they would be relatively familiar as things that are inappropriate. I do want to call out the asking a student to keep a secret. I had a few weeks ago a conversation with a family that was able to share some experience and insights with me. And that was a concern that they particularly raised, that staff member asking a student to keep a secret really needs to be kind of called out as a problem, and wouldn't necessarily be something that everybody would automatically think of as an issue. So that the inclusion of that, I can say at least to that one family, was important. And I think just based on my own experience in the district so far, this question around addressing students with terms of endearment, pet names, or otherwise in any overly familiar manner could be a tricky one, and maybe a little bit controversial for some folks, because some people think it's never appropriate to use kind of terms of endearment, and then other people do, right? Even something like sweetie, or just terms of fondness that some people use almost instinctively, not related to a particular student. So I think that particular clause is probably worth discussion by the committee. As is the use of the first name, right? Again, this is a small district in Maine, and I think it's not that uncommon actually for some of our teachers to go on a first name basis with students. So that is something I would encourage you all to discuss as well. These things around friending students, following students, that social media interaction, in my experience, that's pretty like off limits. That's standard, that would not be allowed. But as you see here in the bold, this is where that question kind of comes up around, well, but what if you already know that family and you have a friendship outside of work? Then where do the boundaries come in? What's the appropriate place to draw that line? And the way this current model is written, it sort of refers to the knowledge and the approval of the parents of the student. But that is a kind of a potentially a tricky line that you might want to talk through a bit more. And then again, as mentioned before, communicating with students on non-school matters via computer, electronic devices, text messages, that seems relatively straightforward, right? Non-school things. But then when you get down to this next one, communicating with students on a staff member's privately owned computer, cell phone, or other electronic device, that starts getting trickier, because some people will say, well, I'm a coach, I don't have a district-owned device. So that's how I need to communicate. But a coach, any team member that we have, can get access to Reach My Teach, and they can communicate through that sort of approved platform with students. So one way to address this is, rather than limiting the communication based on what device is being used or whose device, is to make clear that it has to go through this formal platform. It does seem highly risky to have staff using their own their own phone, chatting with students in general, emailing outside of the formal bounds of our email system. Anything that's sort of beyond those formal communications mechanisms starts, I think, putting and our lawyers would suggest putting people at risk, both staff and students, and the district. And then there's this whole section around things that a staff member might be able to do, but they need to review with their supervisor before they do it. And I think this is also, again, I would encourage the committee to, to really think about and talk about this section. So one that does often come up, I will say, is driving students to events, field trips, whatever, or going to pick up a student and bring them to school because there's an attendance problem and there's no vehicle available, those kinds of things. We do have another policy that addresses staff driving students. I can't remember the letters off the top of my head, and that is on our list of policies to look at a little bit later this year. So, that's probably one where there would be a crossover kind of policy. But that is an example of something that comes up pretty often, I would say, and something that the board probably should be pretty explicit about what the appropriate policy is and behavior there. And then once you get through sort of the definitions of what's allowable or not, there's this section about reporting violations and disciplinary action. There's language in here around referrals to outside agencies, and the note that's in bold is actually not policy language. That's a note from the lawyers that just helps to explain what the legal requirements are and why that language is in there. So when you do get to voting on this, we would take out the notes that are kind of peppered throughout the document. Those are really just to help spark conversation among the committee members. Any questions? I want to kind of stop talking and let you all discuss, but I don't know if there are questions before you do that.
Yeah, this is great, Dr. Warren. Thank you for helping put this together. I had a question about the friending topic. There was language previously about, family approval. I wonder if we could maybe include that, just copy that. I forget where that was previously. Because your child could go to school with, I don't know, or basically there's so much of this in Portland. So I'm just wondering a little bit more about family permission. That could be helpful.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find that language. I think it's here in this area. So friending students, following students, or engaging in any other interactions on social networking sites through digital applications. And this is where that question comes up. So in the case of friendships between families, any contact with students on social media or digital applications must be with the knowledge of the parents or guardians. That's the language from the model policy. I have to be honest that I'm not totally sure as a staff member that would have to implement the policy what that looks like. I mean, once you all pass a policy, then we will have to, write the rules and put the procedures in place that go with it. So we would need to figure that out. What does that mean to be with the knowledge of the parents or guardians? How does one document that? How does one receive the approval,
Yeah.
But that's the way that current model language is written.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to point out was with the mentioning of Reach My Teach. I mean, I don't know. It seems like we're pretty committed to using it now, but I wonder in 3 years, will we still be using Reach My Teach? So could we include a clause that says, use Reach My Teach or otherwise designated communication platform by the district, something like that, just to,
Yeah.
I don't know if that then creates more gray area or it's helpful to have just in case we switch platforms and don't need to revise the policy, but
Maybe if it said something like as defined by GBEBR, which could then be updated by staff without having to go through the full board approval process. And then we could specify in that document, Reach My Teach for now, but if something changes, we could update it.
yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Mhm.
And then I just had a question about the example that was given about the students babysitting or performing chores for staff. Like, I just also wonder about that being appropriate. That in its of itself is like, is that even appropriate for a student to be doing babysitting jobs or other chores for a staff member? I don't like that personally. So that would be that's my feedback.
Was that one,
It's the third bullet point down on that page.
yeah.
I mean, it could just say something about needing parent guardian approval, but I also think it maybe, again, if it's like a family friend, then that could be a different situation than a staff member hiring a student to do work at their house.
Mhm.
Yes, Vice Chair Bondo.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a question on the C, on the disciplinary action. So when I read, and I think with my understanding, so I just wonder if we have to discipline or maybe reporting to the Department of Education or the district attorneys. I think everything aligning. So do we in our side, I know it's kind of a little tricky. Are we keeping the record? Because just to make sure that, you know, some people can go apply for a different job and different district. So what do we do with the record? Are we keeping those record or those yeah, so that's my question. What do we do? Because sometimes, you know, like after reading, I say sometimes they can leave before we have a conclusion of the investigation, you know, of such a for that violation. So what do we do after that? Are we have those in our record and we save, so that person, wherever that person goes to apply for a job, they can still find those records as a referral on the file, or is everything just disappear on our side? If my question was making sense, or I need to rephrase it.
Well, so I want to make sure I understand. So are you saying that if there were an allegation against a staff member and then an investigation took place and
Yes. So I mean, yeah, but you know, the last part is that, you know, then the person can leave prior to the conclusion of the investigation. So when we find that he was guilty and then under that violation, so what do we do with the record? The record follow that person through wherever he has to go to apply for a different job, or he just stay to us?
No, so what I'm understanding from the lawyers, that the law requires that we have to inform if it's a credential holder. So that's, you know, somebody that has state certification of some variety.
Right.
That we have to, as a district, inform them if and then, you know, it lays out all these different categories of types of incidents: alcohol, illegal drugs, physical abuse, etc. If those things, if a person has been determined to have done one of those things, if they're disciplined, suspended, or terminated for any of those reasons, then the district is required to inform the DOE. And if the person leaves before the investigation is done, we are also legally required to make that report to the DOE. I assume the rationale behind that being that someone could try to get out of you know, being investigated by just leaving. And then if it were something serious where they were potentially, you know, harming a student, that the state, I gather, is trying to prevent people from moving from one district to another and escaping an investigation like that. That's how I'm reading this.
Okay.
So I don't think that this section really, we have a whole lot of choice around that, because that is something that we're legally obligated to do.
Okay. So yeah, so my second question is about the students. Here we see the side of the staff. So in that case, when we talk about, because I know if something happened like that, that students won't necessarily reporting, because those kind of relationship is already built. So just what we do with our student, how we protect our students in that case. So here I know then we have only the concept of the teacher, of the staff, or the teachers. So that means, so what do we do in case of students? Do our students be also taking some disciplinary action or not?
Do you mean if a student were accused of doing something like this, like some kind of abuse or something against another student?
No, I mean, no, right here. Maybe it was not making sense in that concept, because that context is just for the staff against the students. But I mean, if they're going, sometimes is a relationship. So when I read some of those aspects here, So some of the conduct, so you can see they can have a sexual allusion, they can have some discussion, personal discussion, or exchanging gifts. So it's kind of little relationship building between the staff and the student. So right here is just about how the disciplinary action is being taken against the staff. So that means what we do for our students.
Are you asking?
Maybe my question is out of that context.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. So are you asking if a student were to do something like sexual banter, what would be the consequences for them?
No. I mean, here it's just about the just here is about maybe I'm out of the context.
Are
I
you
don't know.
are you asking how we would support a student if something like this happened to them?
Yes.
I mean, in general, we we have all kinds of supports in place for students, including, social workers and counselors, and if needed, we turn to external support systems if our own internal folks don't have the ability or the skill set for some reason to provide help. So that would be, in my estimation, the appropriate thing to do would be to make sure that if a student had, even if there weren't necessarily a conclusion that something like this happened, I would still be referring a student to support if they had raised, and often actually this type of allegation would come through a social worker or a counselor. That's not uncommon that's where it gets raised to begin with.
Vice Chair
Oh.
Bondo, at the bottom of the document, at the bottom, or in section B, actually, it says reporting violations. There's a small part that says students and their parents or guardians are strongly encouraged to notify the superintendent or building administrator if they believe a teacher or other staff member may be engaging. So, I mean,
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I
language
see.
is there. Yeah.
Right, perfect. Yeah, I don't know why I missed this part. Yes, thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that.
Is there anyone else in the committee or Chair Lenz that has questions or thoughts about this policy? I was going to echo really quickly, and then Chair Lenz, I saw you came off mute, that I do think that it's worth considering the first name issue. I mean, it's so common in elementary school, especially with non-classroom lead teachers, that the staff person is, Miss Sarah or whatever, and a lot of first name happening. So I would remove that. But I understand where it's coming from because it creates a familiarity. But it seems very appropriate the way it's used presently in Portland. Chair Lenz, go ahead.
Yeah. The other one I just thought I'd love to hear a conversation around is around like the pet names, and because I, even in my own experience and others, just like sometimes, kids get a nickname that then carries over, and like I don't know if it's like if there's a universal rule around this that needs to be put in place, because I think everything is is different, right? Like I think Dr. Warren, as you said, like I always cringe when I hear like staff saying honey or sweetie to people. Like that to me is like a different thing than calling the kid by a nickname. So I just am curious where other folks are on that. And then could you go back up to the personal issue, discussing personal issues one? I think it's on page 2. Oh, go. Oh, you're going so fast. Yeah, there it is. Good job. Discussing personal, sexual, or family issues, employment concerns, or other private matters with one or more students. When I read that the first time, I was like, oh, can the student not talk about personal matters? And I just wonder if there's like a tweak of the language that like we could make so that it's like hyper clear that it's about the staff talking to the student. I can be overridden on that one, but I just felt like it wasn't super clear.
I think culturally it might be tricky with the pet names for a lack of a better term. I just think it's so common for so many people generally generationally. And I'm with you, Chair Lenz, like personally for me, I'm like, that's not how I interact with children. It's not how I want staff to interact with my children, but also I recognize that it's done in such a um, casual way that it doesn't ever seem to have ill intent behind it. And I think that might be a really tricky thing with a large portion of staff to try to implement and also, enforce. It would be really, really tricky. But I'd love to hear other people's opinions.
I think I agree with that. And also thinking about the culture of Portland, such a small and fairly intimate community that we are, enforcing that would be a little difficult. But also, I wanted to say that I do appreciate this policy, specifically the intro where Dr. Warren talks about uh, like physical touch of a student. And in light of the conversation we were having about the other policy, I think this is a very important thing that finally we are talking about. So thank you for that.
I don't want to override the committee's conversation about this, but just on the pet name thing, I want to confess that I caught myself a couple of times calling little like pre-K kids sweetie because I'm just it's like
you're pushing more.
just something that my family does with little kids. And so I stop myself when I do it because I think, oh, that's probably not appropriate in a school setting. But I've heard other people, I used to work in Baltimore, and culturally there and in African American communities that I have, worked and lived in, the use of baby for kids is quite common, and it's an affectionate term and for sort of generally speaking for kids. So I don't know, just I'm not saying one way or another what the committee should do, but just yeah, how I have personally tripped myself up with that, and also heard some situations where maybe staff were using that type of term for female students and not male students, and that's potentially problematic when it becomes a gendered issue.
Ellie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the policy itself kind of explains it a little bit, or otherwise or with terms of endearment, pet names. I think that like that's a little extra because like terms of endearment, so people, I don't know, call me honey or something like that, like a older a lady, like if there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm saying, like, I'll just speak for me, guys, right? And it's because if it is an endearment, but it's like to pull you in, right? It's a very kind way of saying it to a concept or information. And like, for example, like, I mean, I grew up with like 10 sisters, right? So I say love, right? So what's an slip, so there's just, I think that holding people accountable based on deer, right? Like based on a respectable I don't know what you call this, subnoun. So it's something like that, to call people is it's just a little tricky, but we know the difference, right? If there was a guy that's only calling the girl's baby, bro, like what the heck? Like it's pretty like common and obvious. But if it's an elder lady calling a bunch of different kids honey, right? Or you can sense it. And the best part about that, last thing I'll say, best part about it, right, is you will also notice how the teachers interact with students and based on who they're endearing and who they're not. And that's also a way you can identify if there is some type of bias, right? For example. So anyways, just a heads up, but I think that it's a little bit excessive.
Vice Chair Bondo, what would you like to share?
Yeah, I would like to go to a different context as a person of color and African descent. I mean, sometimes the tradition is not, is not acceptable in our side. You know, and I can just go with the pet's name is kind of a little excessive, but I think for the underman, I feel like in my culture, we don't accept it. I mean, and I really appreciate for the policy because it's creating some boundaries and limits on some of those aspects. Then we are respecting different tradition than we have across our diversity in our school because I cannot see my son or my daughter coming home and say, oh, okay. So I just put myself in our culture, you know, in our tradition, and most of our tradition, then we can reflect and value through the school system. And I think it's just reflecting here. Then we have some boundaries to limit those kind of, you know, names and environment. Then some culture, they just don't accept it, don't appreciate. Yeah. So I
Dr. Ryan,
think it's just a garfou, like we say in French, like we just need to make sure that's the way we are protecting our kids. So I mean, we see a lot of great relationship between students, young students, especially elementary schools and teachers. But yeah, in our culture, we just stop right there. Yes.
Dr. Warren, I'm wondering if it's possible within the policy if we can discourage the use of terms of endearment and pet names. I mean, that way it sort of creates more of a culture shift rather than outright banning them. And I don't know how I kind of scanned through to see because there's explicit prohibited conduct, but there isn't really like a discouraging of behaviors. I don't know if that could fit in somewhere.
Yeah, sure. We could add a section, or add some language at least for things that are encouraged or discouraged, but not outright banned.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, like so how about like explicit um explicit terms or yeah, explicit pet names for individual students, right? That could be a piece of it. And but yeah, and I kind of want to just make sure that we're being in the middle. We don't want our teachers to be monotone, right? We kind of want them to also be soft, right, on students as well, because yeah, my community was hard. Everything was hard. If you hard on me at school, I'm gonna pop back off, right? I need you to be like you need to pull me in psychologically.
Chair Lenz, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if like the why is getting lost here a little bit as we're trying to like make a rule around this. And like I think the thing that this one tries to get at is just like that weird power differential that sometimes happens, or something is happening to a student that they don't agree with, right? So like if the teacher has like consent to call the student by a nickname or something like that, like I think that that's fair. So I'm just wondering if maybe like the rule is like the why, not the action in some way, if that makes sense. Like don't call a student something that hasn't been mutually agreed upon, or something like that. I don't know what the right language is, but I think getting at the why maybe could help us.
Yeah, I don't know. Wait, was someone else have their head up? But the other thing is what's pet name? Like, what is? Can we identify what pet name means?
It just means like sweetie, honey, dear, those kinds of things.
So is that the terminology in the dictionary?
I think so.
And look it up.
Okay. So yeah, I just based on a policy a point, if it has multiple different meanings, then we should have to identify that. But yeah, just because it's very confusing. Like it's very, very confusing. And I'm telling you right now, I don't mind. I love it when older women call me honey or dear. It's like I got you, whatever you want. You know what I'm saying? So it's just I have to be kind to people, and that's how I talk to them, even with the youth or someone elder. Like it just pulls them in. So I don't know. It's just, I know what you guys are saying though,
Yeah.
individual students, right? If you have a specific thing for individual students or based on a gender or whatever, you know, like that's a little different.
Well, I think also to your point, Board Member Ali, is that this line is sort of non-specific, and so it's hard to enforce. And so that's part of what's problematic. So what Chair Lentz is saying is maybe clean up what we're trying to get at here with this. And I think we could do that.
Mhm. I think if I'm hearing the discussion right, there are kind of two elements to that. One is being able to nuance it a little bit more so that we're saying we're encouraging or discouraging, we're not outright prohibiting the use of pet names. And there seems to be an element of this that is about not treating an individual child or a group of children by identity differently than other students. So ideally, you wouldn't be calling students by a pet name at all, but if it's the same name you use for every child, because that's just your cultural or generational, a lot of this is generational way of communicating, that's not as concerning as if you're using a pet name for an individual student or for just girls or just boys or.
Yeah, I think that just with some tweaking, we can probably all come to a consensus. So that's why we're doing this in-depth read.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just to specify, like I think we just have to do it because it depends on the intention behind it. Like calling having a specific pet name for a specific individual or a type of individuals.
We're
Yeah,
not
it's
voting on
highly,
this tonight, so we
yeah,
have
it's
time to
yeah,
edit.
it's highly discouraged or something like that. That's but
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes to wrap up, so I don't know if anyone else has any more discussion. We will be bringing this back. Dr. Warren, will we be expecting to vote on it next week, or are we still discussing? I don't remember.
I think it's up to the committee. I know that one thing I would like to do between now and the next meeting is try to get at least a little bit of input from school leaders and maybe some other staff. I think this is one that will directly affect them, so it would be nice to be hearing from them a little bit more before it gets too much further down the road. But
Okay.
yeah, so it's up to the committee to decide how long, you want to keep entertaining it at the committee level. And I think then the other process question is just if we want to start trying to play with the language a little bit and maybe address some of the issues that you all have raised here and come back with some additional proposed language. We could do that. Either a couple of committee members could work on it, or I could work on that with you, Chair, or we could tell our lawyers, or, we can decide how you want to do that. But I think probably rather than just coming back next time and trying to come up with language on the spot, we should probably come back with some possible language for the next conversation.
Board Member Yusra Ali, I do see you. I just want to say one last thing, which is that our next meeting is in about a month, where there's a bit of a break because of the Indigenous Peoples Day holiday. So it is going to be a number of weeks before we meet again. So I'm going to suggest maybe that if anyone has suggestions for language, if you could email them to me and Dr. Warren, and then she and I could collaborate and come up with a plan for next meeting. I think that would be the way to go. That's my recommendation. Board Member Yusra Ali, go ahead.
Just a quick question. Will we get like the updated version? Will it have the strike through and to show the change in language? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And just for clarity's sake as well, I think we'll take out these notes and just put them in the comments boxes off to the side, just so people don't think that the notes are actually part of the proposed policy.
Great. I don't have anything else on this. So our next meeting is scheduled for the last week in October. We are also planning to bring up the proposed policy. I forget the code. It is about class sizes in our district. It's another one that's similar to this in that we do not have one. So we would be creating a new one. So that's coming up next meeting as well. So we will have to vote on those two sexual harassment policies, review this one again with any updates, and then start a discussion about class sizes. So we'll have a pretty full meeting. So any suggestions or anything you have in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and Dr. Warren, and we will get working on that.
Yeah, and Chair, if I can just flag two other things. Start of last week, I think I'm losing all track of days. I attended Drummond Woodsum legal sort of update on state changes to state law that can affect school board policy and just our operations. And because of that, there are a couple of things that we're going to need to also add into our schedule. One is a relatively small update to our restraint and seclusion policy, which I've already had the lawyers working on. And then the other, which we knew was coming and is already on our calendar actually, is the rule that the state created that we now have to have a policy around temperatures in our buildings. And it's something that we had been working on last year at the staff level, just not as a policy, but just because we needed our own guidance for how we handle increasing temperatures. So I now have a draft from our lawyers of policy language, and we'll have to do a little work to try to bring that together with what we've been using already at the staff level. So those are things that are going to come towards the committee as well.
Yeah, and our calendar's we need to revise it a bit, so we will make sure that we do that in the meantime. Okay, I would like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Ali. All in favor, please show your hands. Okay, great. We are now adjourned at 7:20 p.m. And thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Dr. Warren.
Thank you all.